Have you ever felt like you are living a life that isn't really yours, as if somehow you are following a script written by someone else? What if I told you the life you're living isn't really yours? You wake up, you go through the motions, you say the right things, smile at the right times, you're doing everything you're supposed to, and yet something inside you won't shut up. A voice, faint but relentless, keeps whispering, "This isn't me." Not fully, not honestly. And the terrifying part? You can't tell where the performance ends and you begin. Carl Jung didn't think this was rare. He believed this feeling, the sense that we're actors in someone else's story, is the silent epidemic of modern life. We build identities out of pressure, not passion, expectations, not essence. We are trained from the beginning to become acceptable. We learn what earns praise, what keeps people around, what smooths over conflict. And we do it so well, we forget who we were before we needed to be liked. Every time you said yes when you wanted to scream no. Every time you stayed silent to avoid being seen too deeply. Every time you shaped yourself to fit someone else's comfort. That was another stitch in the mask. And Jung had a name for that mask. He called it the persona. It's not fake, it's functional. It's the version of yourself you crafted to survive, to succeed, to stay safe. You wear one at work, another with friends, another with family. And the scary part is, it works. It brings approval, acceptance, even admiration. But it also costs you something. Bit by bit, your real self drifts further into the background. And then one day you realize you've become the mask. So ask yourself this: when you're completely alone, no roles to play, no one watching, who are you really? And what if you don't know? That disconnection, that low hum of emptiness even when everything looks fine on paper? That's not weakness. That's not failure. That's your real self knocking. But here's the problem. The longer we ignore that knock, the louder it gets, and not in healthy ways. You start feeling anxious for no reason. You hit goals and feel nothing. You look in the mirror and see someone who's almost real, but not quite. And the worst part? You're not sure how to get back, or if there even is a way back. This is the psychological cost of wearing the mask too long, because the persona can help you fit in, but it cannot make you whole. And that's where the real work begins. The truth is, the version of you that shows up every day may be a stranger to the self you buried years ago. Not out of malice, out of necessity. You were taught, subtly or brutally, that certain parts of you were too much, too loud, too sensitive, too angry, too weird, too wild, too real. So you push those parts down. But here's the thing. What you bury doesn't die. It grows in the dark. Jung called that buried part of you the shadow. Not because it's evil, not because it's wrong, but because it's unseen. The shadow is everything you had to repress to be accepted. It's your rage, your shame, your fear, your untamed joy. It's your truth, uncensored. And if you never acknowledge it, it doesn't stay quiet. It leaks. Ever snapped over something small? Ever felt a wave of envy that made no sense? Ever sabotaged something good for reasons you couldn't explain? That's your shadow acting out, not to ruin you, but to get your attention. Because here's the twist. The parts of you you've rejected are where your freedom lives. You cannot be whole if you've amputated half your soul just to be liked. You cannot find peace while hiding from the parts of yourself that hold your power. But facing the shadow isn't about fighting it. It's about listening to it. It's asking, what did I silence in order to belong? Who did I become so I wouldn't be abandoned? And then, who would I be if I stopped running from that truth? The journey Jung described, the process of becoming your true self, isn't about perfection. It's about integration. It's the slow, often painful, always liberating work of taking your mask off, meeting your shadow, and choosing to live from something deeper than performance. This process has a name. He called it individuation. It's not about becoming someone new. It's about becoming someone real. But the first step is the hardest, admitting that you've been living a life shaped more by survival than by truth. If the persona is the mask and the shadow is what we hide, then the self is what exists when those walls finally collapse. But most people never meet their self. They meet expectations, they meet approval, they meet obligation. But the self, that's buried too deep, and the digging feels dangerous. Why? Because facing yourself means giving up control over the version of you that kept you safe. It means letting go of identities you spent years polishing just to be accepted. It means asking terrifying questions like, what if I built my whole life around someone I never really was? This is why Jung said, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are, not who you were trained to be, not who people expect, not who your trauma sculpted, but the original blueprint that got buried under survival. To get there, you have to go inward. And that journey, it isn't clean. It isn't pretty. It isn't TikTok therapy in a soundbite. It's real work. And it starts where you least want to look, your unconscious. Because here's what most people don't realize. Your unconscious is running the show. Until you name it, claim it, and integrate it, it will direct your life. And you'll call it fate. Jung taught that your unconscious isn't just personal, it's collective, meaning there are patterns, stories, and structures inside you that existed before you were born. Ancient codes, archetypes, and unless you become aware of them, they'll shape your choices, relationships, and identity without your permission. Think about it. Why do we all respond to certain stories the same way? Why does the idea of the hero, the lover, the outcast, the mother, the sage, feel so familiar, even across cultures? Because they live inside us. They're part of what Jung called the collective unconscious, a deep structure of human experience that plays out in our lives, whether we recognize it or not. And if you don't realize you're playing out an archetype, you get stuck in its loop. You think you're just being you, but you're really being the hero who can never rest, or the caregiver who always abandons their own needs, or the rebel who destroys everything, even when there's nothing left to fight. So ask yourself, what roles have I been playing so long I forgot I was acting? It's not that archetypes are bad. They're necessary. They're part of what gives our lives shape. The problem is when we identify with only one or ignore the rest. That's when we get stuck in a story that isn't whole. Let's say your dominant archetype is the caregiver. You're always helping, fixing, supporting. You say yes when you're exhausted. You smile through resentment. You think love means sacrifice. Eventually you burn out. And when you do, you don't know who you are without someone to save. You collapse and feel guilty for needing help yourself. Or maybe you're the warrior, the one who never lets their guard down, who always pushes harder, achieves more, never stops grinding. But inside, you're terrified of being seen as weak, so you stay armored even when you're bleeding. This is what happens when archetypes rule from the shadows. They become prisons disguised as personality. But when you become aware of them, when you integrate them, you gain something most people never touch: inner freedom. You get to choose how you show up. You stop reacting. You start responding. You stop performing. You start living. And that's the power of individuation. You don't just balance the mask and the shadow. You step into a deeper alignment. You realize, I'm not just the roles I play. I'm the one who decides which role to play and when. But what happens when we don't do this work? That's where things get dark. When you ignore the shadow, when you cling to the persona, when you stay loyal to outdated archetypes, you start to fracture. You live in constant low-level dissonance. Everything feels slightly off. You feel busy but aimless, known but not seen, accomplished but not fulfilled. Your relationships start to feel performative. Your work starts to feel hollow. You laugh, but something underneath you is numb. And over time, that disconnection deepens into suffering. You might call it anxiety or burnout or just tired. But deep down, something is breaking because the soul was never meant to live under a mask. And here's the real danger. The longer you suppress the self, the more your shadow starts to find ways to speak. Through sabotage, through addiction, through sudden outbursts or unexplained numbness, through dreams that feel more real than your waking life. It's like a pressure valve. The deeper the truth gets buried, the more force it builds, and eventually it erupts. But even then, most people won't turn inward. They'll blame their job, their partner, the world, anything but themselves. Because facing your shadow means letting go of the illusion that you're in control. And yet, this is where healing begins. So what happens when you finally stop running? When you turn toward the shadow instead of away from it? When you peel off the persona, not all at once, but slowly, bravely, piece by piece? What happens is this. You begin to remember who you were before the world told you who to be. You stop negotiating your worth. You stop shrinking to fit. You stop apologizing for existing. You no longer need to be liked to feel safe. You no longer need to win to feel valuable. You no longer need to play a role to feel real. And suddenly the things that used to control you, the fear of judgment, the craving for approval, the constant self-editing, start to lose their grip. This is what Jung called individuation. It's not perfection. It's not enlightenment. It's something quieter, realer. It's waking up one day and realizing you don't need to keep performing your life. You can live it. That doesn't mean everything gets easier. In fact, sometimes it gets harder, because now you can't lie to yourself anymore. You can't pretend the job that drains you is fine. You can't keep the relationship that demands a watered-down version of you. You can't keep betraying your truth just to stay comfortable. When you meet your real self, you can't unsee it. And that's a powerful kind of liberation. But it also demands change. You may lose people. You may outgrow roles. You may walk away from everything that once made you feel successful, and it might feel like loss, but it's actually space. Space for alignment, space for truth, space for peace that isn't borrowed from validation. Because now you're not chasing love, you're becoming it. You're not begging for freedom, you're building it. You're not searching for meaning, you're embodying it. And all of this starts not with some external breakthrough, but with one quiet internal decision. I'm done pretending. That moment, that's the beginning of everything. It's the day you stop asking, who do they need me to be? And start asking, who was I before I forgot? It's the day you stop fearing your shadow and start learning from it. The day you stop performing your worth and start living your truth. The day you stop editing yourself down to be digestible and start taking up space. But here's the paradox. To become your true self, you don't need to add more. You need to shed, not become someone better. Just stop being someone else. That's why this work is so misunderstood. It's not about self-improvement. It's about self-remembrance. It's not about fixing what's broken. It's about uncovering what was buried. It's about facing the fear that if people saw who you really are, they'd leave. And discovering that when you see who you really are, you'll never leave yourself again. And that kind of loyalty, that's the foundation for a life that doesn't crumble under pressure, that doesn't need applause to feel meaningful, that doesn't need to be perfect to be real. So the question now is simple, but not easy. Will you choose to stay asleep inside a life that looks good, or wake up to a life that feels right? Will you keep playing a role that earns applause, or write a new script that honors your truth? Because this work, this inward path, it's not glamorous. It's not linear. It's not something you get to post about with neat little quotes. But it's the only path that leads to freedom. Not freedom from responsibility, not freedom from hardship, but freedom from the prison of being someone you're not. And that freedom changes everything. You'll speak with more honesty. You'll love with more presence. You'll move through the world not seeking yourself in others, but meeting others from the ground of already knowing who you are. That's the shift. That's the revolution. And it doesn't start outside you. It starts now. So if something inside you is stirring right now, listen to it. Don't scroll past it. Don't stuff it down. That's not just discomfort. That's yourself calling you home. And if you felt that in your body, if this video said what you didn't know you needed to hear, then this is your moment. Don't just consume the insight. Live it. Subscribe if you haven't already. We're building a space here, not for self-help fluff, but for real psychological truth. For people who want to break patterns, not just talk about them. For people who are done faking wholeness and ready to build it. And as you move forward from this video, remember this. You are not the mask. You are not the role. You are not the fear or the shame or the script. You are the one who sees, the one who questions, the one who chooses. And the moment you choose truth over comfort, reflection over performance, alignment over approval, you don't just change your life, you reclaim it. I'll see you in the next one.